In 8.5, he mentions the matter of the keywords. So do keep in mind, you don't use your keywords and the meaning of the preposition at the same time. Or you come up with some really funny things like, if you're always thinking, if I see a dative noun, then I have to add to, then you would say in to the world, right? That wouldn't work. It's just in the world, not in to the world, okay? Alrighty. Let's take a look at 8.9. Now, to talk about dependent clauses, we have to talk about independent clauses. What's the difference between a dependent clause and an independent clause? Well, an independent clause can stand on its own, right? That's sort of the standard definition. They can stand on their own. They express a complete thought. So what would an independent clause be? Well, something like, I love peanut butter. That's a complete thought. There's a verb. There's a subject. Sometimes the subject's implied. That's okay, as long as you can piece together an implied subject or an overt one and a verb. You generally got an independent clause. A dependent clause, on the other hand, is one that cannot stand on its own, okay? Instead, it is embedded in an independent clause. So, what are examples of embedded clauses or dependent clauses? Well, I could have clauses like because or in order that clauses. I love peanut butter because it's yummy. The dependent clause there is because it's yummy. Or I could say, I sent you to New Mexico because I love the mountains. There, because I love the mountains, is a dependent clause. If I looked at you and said, because it's yummy, that's not a complete thought. You feel like you're missing something. There's a need when you have because in front of a clause, because it's dependent, there's a need to embed it in a larger clause. All right? And in Greek, you're going to learn the word henna. How can you translate henna? In order that. Yes, that's one way to do it. So in order that. You could also translate it as simply that. Okay? We've come across the word hati. What does that mean? Okay, so that could be because, or it could be translated as that. And both of these sorts of conjunctions are introducing dependent clauses, and that means that you're going to find them in the context of a larger clause, an independent clause. As you come to these dependent clauses, here's what you need to be very careful about, all right? You need to understand that inside these dependent clauses, there's going to be subjects and verbs, and sometimes direct objects and prepositional phrases that modify that verb or a noun inside the dependent clause. Don't get those constituents of the dependent clause mixed up with the constituents of the independent clause. Each clause, the independent clause and the dependent clause, are going to have their own verb that forms the core of those sentences, those clauses, and you need to try to keep those verbs' constituents together, or you're going to come up with some really funny problems. In other words, your main verb may be the kind that doesn't take a direct object. Your dependent clause verb might be the kind that takes a direct object. And then you're going to see this accusative case noun. So which verb will that one go with? Well, it'll go with the one that, the clause that has the verb that takes direct objects, okay? So you want to keep your eye open for these sorts of things. When we start looking at the homework, I'll remind you of this and just show you what I do to try to help keep these things clear and separate. Okay? Now, in 8.10, we're introduced to this verb eimi. What does a me mean? To what? A me is to be. Well, okay, I am is the meaning of a me as a form. It's the first person singular form. But when I talk about just the general meaning of a verb, I usually like to use what's called the infinitive in English. To plus that verb's meaning. To eat, to drink, to be merry. In this case, to be. To be. Now, in Greek, our verbs are going to be marked for person and number, okay? So this is going to be 8:10 through 8:14, this little section. Okay, so verbs in Greek are marked for person and number. We need to make sure that we're clear on what we mean by this. Person can be described or identified using the numbers 1, 2, and 3. First person, second person, third person. When I refer to grammatical person as in first person, which people am I talking about when I say first person reference? Well, I'm talking about I. That is to say, first person refers to the speaker. Okay? Now the speaker is the I, right? If I say, I love peanut butter, the I there is the speaker. The speaker, I, loves peanut butter. It doesn't mean you're the hearer, right? But if you say, hey, I love peanut butter too, now you're speaking and I refers to you as the speaker. Now, we'll use I if it's singular, but what if the speaker is not just speaking for the speaker's self, but for those that are with the speaker? Then which pronoun might we use? We, and that would be the plural first person form. So I and we are the speaker or the speaker and the speaker's associates. Second person, on the other hand, refers to who? You. And that is the addressee, okay? Speaker is I, addressee is you. In English, you could be what number, singular or plural? It could be both, right? How do we try to disambiguate that? Well, I mean, do we modify our forms of you to try to disambiguate whether we're dealing with singular or plural? Yeah, so what do Texans like to do to make sure that you know that they use plural? Yes, you can get y'all, right? Or what do non-Southern folk do? They may say you guys. That's right, you guys. And then some people even go crazy and say yous guys. And I understand that even in some parts of the South, it's not just y'all, but it's all y'all. I had a friend who grew up speaking British English. He was traveling through Tennessee, I think he said, and he walked in all by himself to a convenience store to pay for his gas. And this poor, sweet Southern lady, this little grandma behind the counter says, "How are y'all doing today?" And he looks around and he says, "I'm sorry, are you talking to me?" "Yeah, I'm talking to y'all." He says, "I thought y'all meant more than one me." And she says, "Oh, no, around here, we're talking to more than one y'all. It's all y'all." So in that place, y'all was you singular, and all y'all was you plural. You got to be careful for these things. Third person is, yes. So without using the pronouns, how would I describe who amounts to third person? It basically everyone else. Okay? If you're not the speaker and you're not the addressee, you're everyone else. You're a third person.
Is it fair to say that they're indirectly addressed, whereas second person is directly?
No, not necessarily. So if I wanted to say something like, he loves peanut butter, I may be talking to you, right? So you're the you there, but we're not talking about each other. I'm not saying that I love peanut butter, and I'm not saying that you love peanut butter. I'm saying that he loves peanut butter, and the he we're talking about might be standing here, or he might be in China, right? So I'm not addressing a third person referent at all, okay? I'm talking about him, or her, but not addressing. If I am, then it's going to be second person, okay? So for pronouns, it's going to be, if it's singular, he, she, it. If it's plural, they in English, right? Now, what about Moses? Is Moses first person, second person, or third person? Moses is third, unless you're Moses, right? In other words, if I'm making reference to Moses in a conversation with you and you're not Moses, then I'm talking about someone besides me and someone besides you. How do I know Moses is third person? Well, what pronoun would you replace Moses with? He. And he is what person? Third. That's right. Okay. So our verbs in Greek are going to be marked for person, first, second, or third person, and number, which is singular versus plural. Okay? And so what we're going to see is that the verb eimi, to be, has 6 forms based on these configurations. First person singular, first person plural. Second singular, second plural. Third singular, third plural. Okay? Generally, the endings in Greek are going to indicate who the subject of the verb is. When you get to Hebrew, you're going to find that prefixes and suffixes can do that. Okay? But in Greek, we're looking for suffixes, for inflectional endings. All right? So let me just jot that word down. I think I talked about the word inflection a little earlier, but inflections are changes to a word to vary its form. Inflectional endings are the changes to a word at the end that will vary its form. Case endings are inflectional endings, aren't they? But we're now going to see that verbs can have inflectional endings. And these inflectional endings don't change the meaning of the verb in terms of the core lexical semantics of the verb, but they do change who's doing the verb. That is a change of meaning, but it's a grammatical change of meaning, you see. So let's take a quick look at the verb forms here. Okay, so take a look at these forms. We have eimi. This is also the lexical form. The lexical form is the dictionary form. In English, our dictionary forms are not first-person singular forms. We use the infinitive form for our lexical form. So Greek doesn't do that. Greek will use the first-person singular form in the present tense. So eimi is first-person singular, and that is I. So everybody say this with me, eimi. And this is I am. I am. A is second singular, and it's, well, pronounced A. Everybody say that with me. A. All right, and this is you are. And then the third singular form is estin. Is he, she, or it is. Over here on the right side, first person plural. Everyone, esmen. We are. Second person plural. Este. Is y'all are. I will go ahead and use y'all just to make sure nobody's confused. So no, you guys is not appropriate. Not in Texas. Okay, so you all are, y'all are, you are. And then third person plural, esin, is they are. And that they could be any gender. Now, as I mentioned, these forms are marking just person and number, not gender. Not gender. Some languages that you will learn, again, Hebrew is another example, they'll mark person, gender, and number. Okay, in Greek, we don't do that. So if I'm a woman and I want to say eimi, I'm going to use the same form as a man would use, eimi. If you're a woman or a man and I want to say you are, it's a. Okay? Now, just a few comments here. What do you notice about the breathing marks for all of these forms? They are all smooth breathings. You need a smooth breathing. If I ask you, and I will, if I ask you to reproduce the forms of eimi in the present tense, you will need to put a smooth breathing with all of these. Notice that in the first and second singular and the third plural, we don't have the smooth breathing over the epsilon, do we? Why not? That's right. These are diphthongs. And the diphthong has its breathing mark and its accent over the second member of the diphthong. Okay, but in the third singular and the first and second plural, there's no diphthong here. It's just the epsilon, and so the smooth breathing will go directly over that. Okay, so let's say these one more time. Ready? A-me, a, estin, esmen, este, asin. All righty. Now, in 8.13, he mentions the movable nu. What is a movable nu? It is a nu that can move. All right? That is to say, you might see it, you might not in certain circumstances. It's there to break up two contiguous vowel sounds. Now, the verb third singular esten has a movable nu. The basic form is esti, okay? And the nu is going to jump in there to prevent a problem in sound with a vowel that starts the word right after it. All right? It seems like by the time we get to this point in the history of the Greek language, this nu is pretty much used even when you don't have any vowel here. So you're going to see esten quite frequently. I think there's only one place that you'll see it without the nu. Asin, that always happens with the movable nu. The form really is a C, and the movable nu has sort of become welded to it. Now in 8.14, we learned the past tense form of a-me, and he only gives you the third singular form, and it's ain. Notice it has a smooth breathing and a circumflex here, and that's he, she, it, not is, but was. And you need to memorize that. That form of the verb happens quite regularly. Now, in 8.15, there's one last thing that needs to be said here. In 8.15, Mounce deals with something called the predicate nominative. You know that the subject of a clause will be in what case? It'll be in the nominative case, right? Direct object will be in the accusative case. That will happen if the verb is transitive. What does transitive mean? Not so much with motion. It means that the verb takes a direct object. All right? Think about the verb to kill. If I walk up to you and say, Peter Kim kills, or Peter Kim killed, past tense. That verb seems like it's being used in an incomplete way because the verb to kill is transitive. I'm expecting a direct object with that verb, right? If I said something like, hey, did you hear that Mark ate? You would say what? What? Right? Mark ate what? Because to eat, generally understood, is a transitive verb. It requires a direct object. But there are other verbs that are not transitive. We call those linking verbs. And these are verbs that are also described or can be described as copular or copulas. Okay? And the verb to be in English is just such a verb. If I say something like not Peter killed, but rather Peter is, then whatever comes after that in English is not going to be a direct object. Okay? Rather, it is what's called the predicate nominative, And given that name, what do you think the case would be in Greek? It would be nominative case. So Peter is good, or Peter is a man. Okay? Those sorts of expressions in Greek, Peter's going to be what case? Nominative, because he's the subject, right? But the words good and man will also be nominative case in situations like this. All right. So, how would we say that then? Well, so, Petros, estin, and then good would be, do we know agathos? It's in the next chapter. Okay, good. But notice that Petros, nominative case, sigma, agathos, nominative case, sigma for the adjective. Okay? If Peter is a man, it's Petros estin anthropos. And notice that is also nominative case. All right. So that's the case we're looking for when we have a verb of being, a copula, that is asserting what the subject is. Not what the subject does, but what the subject is. Okay? That makes sense? All right. Very good. Well, I think that's all I really want to say about the chapter. Does anybody have any final questions here? Yes?
In 8.12, under the chart, there's a paragraph there that says, except for I, the forms of me are inflected, which means they push their accent back on the previous word. I didn't really understand.
Yeah, so in the forms that we wrote, you see the accent marks in those, right? But when you actually see it in a sentence, you'll notice this strange thing where there's not an accent on the word for to be. You're going to see that the accent is on the prior word. So you won't really, if you were doing stress accents and speaking Greek, you wouldn't actually stress forms of the verb to be in the various forms.
So does the word before have a different accent than it would?
You'll find something strange. So you'll find a normal accent and then an accent at the end of the word. Yeah. So it's interesting. So enclitics are words that really lean backwards on the prior word to form a kind of accentual unit. And proclitics are words that will lean forward on the next word. So clitic, it comes from the Greek word klino, which means to lean or recline. So you're either leaning backwards or forwards. Okay, good.